good come out of Lake County? I ask this because one of the things I really like to do is to kind of contextualize this gospel geography with our local geography. And Lake County, like Nazareth, is far north of the center of power and wealth and the cosmopolitan life. Like Lake County, Nazareth was a bunch of working class people. Our excavations have shown that there was a quarry nearby and a lot of artisans and kind of stone workers in Nazareth. And like Lake County, Nazareth is kind of the butt of jokes, as we see from this question from Nathaniel this morning. But this is a question that illuminates because it tells us something about who the Messiah was expected to be. And they expected the Messiah to be from somewhere near Jerusalem, if not from Jerusalem. They expected the Messiah to be a powerful king or perhaps some powerful temple leader, which was all in Jerusalem. Nobody expected a Messiah from some podunk town way up in the north part of Israel. But this gospel and this reminder of the expectation, it's a reminder that God works in and through a lot of people and places that we don't expect. This weekend, our country is commemorating the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., someone who did great and really important work in the world through the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. And when I think about people who are likely to have done the work that they do, and I think about Dr. King, I think, well, that's actually somebody who was pretty likely to have done that work. He was a pastor. He was a very excellent orator. His father was the pastor of a large and prominent black church in Atlanta. So this is someone we might expect to do the work that he did. But my 13 years living in Atlanta introduced me to some other people in the civil rights movement who were less likely to have done that work. And I have a story about one of them. Her name is Sarah Mitchell Parsons. And Sarah was born in 1912 in a very prominent family in Georgia. Sarah had very clear expectations about what her life should be. She should get married, have children, be involved in the PTA, maybe in the women's auxiliary or junior league. She should go to church, maybe play bridge. And above all, what she should do is work to keep the status quo. Because I can tell you, in upper class white Southern families, that's always the goal, is status quo. We're not changing the way we do things. And Sarah lived that life to the expectations for the first probably half of her life. And Sarah was a member of her Methodist church and met Jesus there, and maybe met Jesus many times. So at some point in the 50s, when she was around 40, Sarah started looking out at the world and said, things are not as they ought to be. This whole segregation and Jim Crow deal that we've got going, this is not what God wants. This is not God's plan. So Sarah started getting involved. So she joined her local chapter of the League of Women Voters, which she was later president of. She then integrated the Atlanta chapter of the League of Women Voters. And she still felt like there was more work to be done. So in 1961, Sarah ran for the school board of the Atlanta Public Schools, and she won. Now, she didn't run on a platform of, hey, we're going to integrate these schools. But yet, when she got in her position and started visiting schools, she recognized that separate was definitely not equal, and that this was not okay. And she realized that there was a lot of work to be done to give all of the children of Atlanta equal opportunity, no matter what their skin color or their wealth status was. They all deserved the same education. So Sarah had 2 terms on the school board, and she was an integral part of integrating the Atlanta school system. And as part of this work, there were some costs. Sarah's husband of 30 years divorced her in 1966. Sarah wrote and spoke of a lot of her old friends that she'd known all of her life, had all left and abandoned her because she was standing up for something that they didn't believe in. When I saw Sarah speak, which was maybe around 2008 or 9, someone in the audience asked her about that. What was it like to lose your husband and all your friends? That must have been so painful. And she said it was. But it was okay because I ended up with a new husband and new friends. And in fact, that day when she was speaking to a group at a bookstore, she and some of her friends had arrived in a chartered bus coming from the retirement home where they all lived together. Sarah found new life by following Jesus. And Sarah's life is a reminder that God really does work through anyone. God works through the people we might least expect to do God's work. God works in the places where we least expect God to show up. And the other thing about Sarah's story that really has intrigued me is that it was those regular encounters with Jesus that changed and transformed her life. Our gospel story today tells us about some encounters with Jesus. But first, we need to back up because this gospel reading starts with, and the next day. So we want to go back and find out what happened the day before. And that was Jesus was going through Galilee. He met Andrew and Simon Peter and Philip. And he said, hey, y'all come and see. And they did. And they had an experience of Jesus that transformed all of them. And Jesus then said, follow me. And Philip did such a good job of that the next day he was out evangelizing, something we could take some lessons from. So Philip goes to Nathanael and says, hey, Nathanael, there's this guy, and I met him yesterday, and he's like the Messiah. It's amazing. You've got to come and see this. To which Nathanael scoffs, but he's from Nazareth. Like, nothing good comes from there. What are you talking about? But Nathanael took his skepticism and his doubt and met Jesus, to where Jesus welcomed him. Jesus brought him in. Jesus said, come and see. Come and see what I can do. Come and see how I can transform you. And after that encounter, that experience of Jesus, then Nathanael was like, wow, you're the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Nathanael was changed by that encounter with Jesus. I imagine that Sarah Mitchell Parsons had at least one, if not many, encounters with Jesus where she brought some doubts and some questions. I don't know exactly what Sarah was taught about Jesus when she was growing up, but I know, having grown up in the South in a white family, that there's a teaching about Jesus that says Jesus doesn't want you to change anything. Just come to Jesus and don't worry about what's happening out in the world. We stay with Jesus in the church. And Sarah had to have asked some questions of that Jesus, that first Jesus that she knew. Sometimes now we might call that deconstructing, where you realize that the God that you've been taught about isn't the full picture of God. And Jesus drew Sarah in. Let her ask those questions. Let her challenge, why is the world the way it is when you say that all people are deeply loved by God, but we are not loving all people like you tell us to? Jesus said to Sarah, come and see. Follow me. And she did. Jesus invited Sarah into a life of transformation. And that's what Jesus is inviting us to. Jesus is inviting us into new life. He's inviting us to transform ourselves, both individually and as a community. And there's another word for transformation, and it's a scary one. It's called change. Nobody likes it, really. But that's what Jesus is inviting us to. And yet change is hard. But we need those continued encounters with Jesus to sustain us through times of change and times of uncertainty. That's why I love that we have the Eucharist here once a week, because it gives us an experience of Christ that will sustain us through painful and hard and challenging times in our lives. So in this season of Epiphany, when we think about God being made known through Jesus, I invite you to ask questions, to come to Jesus with your doubts and skepticism. Come and see. I invite you to bring your fear to Jesus. Come and see. I invite you to bring your wonder, your questions about the world. Come and see. Bring your whole self, all of you, all of your questions. Come and see all of your pain and your hurt. Come and see. Come and see these places of transformation. Come and see where Jesus is inviting us in this new year. Come and see the new life that Jesus has in store for us.